Now, Gertrude Bell. Gertrude Bell was a woman born in the last century, was one of the first women to go to Oxford. And at Oxford she studied history. She loved history. And she also loved mountain climbing. I mean, that was something for a woman back in those days. Loved mountain climbing, loved hiking. There's one story that she was climbing a mountain and her skirt, remember how the women had those long skirts back then? The skirt got in the way. So what did Gertrude do? Get rid of the skirt, and they said she went up the mountain in her underwear, which I would love to have seen that. Anyway, Gertrude in 1892 visited her uncle, who was an ambassador in Persia. And so she visited and fell in love with the Arabs and the Arab culture. And she learned Arabic. And then she spent her time going all around the desert. And from the year 1900 to 1912, she made 6 big trips throughout Arabia. And what the lady would do, she'd go into a town, and she'd hire a bunch of guides. The guides would then go with her, brought the horses, brought the mules, and she was alone. And she just traveled about the desert. And at night she'd travel, she might meet up with some of the Arab tribes there, and she would go in and enjoy drinks with them, and she could speak their language, of course, and the fact that she was a woman actually was an advantage. They called her Al-Khatun, which means the lady, and she could not only visit the men, she could also visit the ladies. So she had that advantage of seeing the culture. Anyway, she, from 1912, 1914, that's when we had World War I, and she wanted to be sent to the Middle East and work there with the British. They said, no, we won't let you do that. So what they did is she went to the Western Front, and she was there with the Red Cross and invented a system to link up the poor soldiers that got wounded, and remember there were a lot that got wounded and killed. She linked them up so that they could be linked up with their families back in England. So an awful lot of wounded soldiers could thank Our Lady Al-Khatun because she was able to have them see and be with their families again. Well, anyway, finally in 1916, the British said, oh, here's this lady. She knows all these languages. By the way, she knew 8 languages. 8, including Arabic and others. She was sent down, 1916, to Cairo, where she met who? Lawrence of Arabia. You all heard of Lawrence. Now, some people say that Gertrude Bell was the feminine Lawrence of Arabia. But if you really know your history, Lawrence of Arabia was the masculine Gertrude Bell.
All right.
Now, Gertrude Bell, back in those days, one gentleman said about her, she is a very clever lady who has a masculine mind. I don't know if that's praise or not. But anyway, Gertie Bell and Lawrence had similar dreams of helping the Arabs. And the idea was to help the Arabs have their own country. And of course they had to revolt against the Ottoman Empire and overthrow it in that part of the world. Gertie Bell and Lawrence actually worked together. And Lawrence eventually came to understand that the English, Winston Churchill and the rest of them, were not about letting the Arabs run anything. And so he actually, about 1920-21, returned to England. And then, you know, later on he was killed in a motorcycle accident. But Gertie Bell stayed on. Gertie felt that even though they couldn't make the independence dream come true for the Arabs, she was going to try her best that the Arabs could run things as much as she was able to do. And in 1921, she was one of the few, but she's the only woman that attended the conference at which they decided to set up Iraq. And Gertrude Bell wound up in Baghdad. And in Baghdad, she helped draft the boundaries of the country, and she felt that the Kurds should be part of Iraq. Now that's a really strong kind of historical controversy about that. Should that have happened? The other thing Gertie did is that Faisal, she helped Faisal take over. He became the king and ruled Iraq. And Gertrude actually helped him to understand how to deal with the British. Gertrude was a political officer. She was a major in the British Army, an intelligence officer, and Gertrude every morning would go out, get her horse, and she'd go riding all around Iraq. She, besides being a mountain climber, as I mentioned earlier, she loved hikes, she loved meeting people, she loved archaeology. And you know the museum that they talk about that suffered during the war, lost a lot of his artifacts. Guess who started that museum? Gertrude Bell. So, those are two people I wanted to tell you about. Queen Zenobia, don't forget Queen Zenobia, and Gertrude Bell, and they're making a movie of Gertrude. It's coming out next year, and I think Kidman is playing the role of Gertie Bell. Now, one thing I have to tell you about Gertie actually led the anti-suffrage movement in England. Anti-suffrage, and I think that's why she isn't that popular. But what she used to say is this: if all women do is work in the kitchen and live in the bedroom, they don't deserve to be running the country. So anyway, that's Gertie. Ooh, Gertie. And I'm going to pass this around. These are some photographs of Gertrude Bell. This one here is with the pyramids, and there's about 10 people all up on camels. One of them is Winston Churchill. They said about Winston they had to keep gluing him back into his saddle because he kept falling off the camel. And next to her on the other side is Lawrence of Arabia. And there's Gertie, and Gertie rode camels all the time. The other picture down here is of her at the 1921 conference where they set up the future history in terms of Iraq. Here's Gertie out looking for archaeology, and then another photograph of her with the pyramids. So let me pass that around. I really want to urge you to see the movie, Gertie Bell.
Thank you, Joe.
Can't have a greater, better lady. Thank you.